You're chilling at your family's secluded cabin, surrounded by nothing but trees and tranquility, when out of nowhere, a nosy neighbor tries to get you arrested for just being there. Sounds wild, right? Well, that's exactly what happened to me. And let me tell you, the way this unfolded left her completely speechless. And trust me, you're going to want to hear how it all went down. Hit that like button if you've ever dealt with a Karen, and let's dive into this crazy story.
They say trouble has a way of finding you, even when you're in the middle of nowhere, trying to escape the chaos of the world. For me, that escape was my family's old cabin, a little slice of heaven tucked away at the edge of a dense forest, about an hour's drive from the nearest town. This place is special. It's got weathered wooden walls that creak in the wind, a sagging porch that's seen decades of sunsets, and a view of a glassy lake that feels like it's straight out of a painting. The air smells like pine and earth, and the only sounds are the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a loon, or maybe the crackle of a fire if I'm feeling cozy. It's the kind of place where you can hear your own thoughts, where the world slows down and lets you breathe. I've been coming to this cabin since I was a kid. My grandpa built it with his own hands, and every summer we'd pile in, me, my parents, my cousins, fishing, telling ghost stories, and roasting marshmallows until we were sticky and giggling. Even now, as an adult, it's my sanctuary. When life gets too loud, this is where I go to reset. So, that Friday, I packed up my truck with a cooler full of snacks, some old vinyl records, and my trusty fishing rod, ready for a weekend of nothing but peace. I got to the cabin just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I hauled my stuff inside, dusted off the old rocking chair on the porch, and started unpacking a box of family keepsakes I'd brought to sort through. Photo albums, my grandma's recipe book, a chipped mug my grandpa used to sip his coffee from. It felt like a little trip down memory lane. But as I was flipping through a faded photo album, I caught something out of the corner of my eye, a flicker of movement at the edge of the trees, maybe 50 yards from the cabin. At first, I thought it was a deer or maybe a hiker who'd wandered too far off the trail. The cabin's remote, but it's not unheard of for people to pass through. I stepped onto the porch, squinting into the dusk, trying to make out the shape. That's when I saw her, Karen. Now, let me tell you about Karen. She's not just any neighbor. She's the kind of neighbor who lives for drama. You know that type? Always watching, always judging, always ready to turn a molehill into a mountain. I'd heard about her from the few folks who live in the scattered cabins around the lake. Apparently, she's been the self-appointed sheriff of the area for years, calling the cops over kids riding dirt bikes, complaining about campfires, even reporting someone for suspiciously parking their car too long. She's got this aura of entitlement, like she owns the whole forest. Karen came marching out of the shadows, her face twisted with indignation, like I'd personally insulted her by existing. "You don't belong here," she shouted, her voice cutting through the quiet like a chainsaw. She was pointing at me, her finger shaking with righteous fury. "This is private property, and I know everyone who's supposed to be here." I tried to stay calm. "Ma'am, this is my family's cabin," I said, holding up my hands. "I've been coming here my whole life." But she wasn't having it. To Karen, I wasn't a person with a story. I was a problem to be solved. She whipped out her phone, already dialing, her voice loud enough to echo across the lake. "I'm calling the police," she declared, like she was starring in her own crime drama. Before I could even process what was happening, I heard it. The faint wail of sirens in the distance, growing louder with every second. My stomach twisted. I'm just a guy trying to enjoy a weekend at my own cabin, and now the cops are coming? All because Karen decided I was a criminal? I stood there, heart pounding, watching the red and blue lights flicker through the trees as the cruiser got closer. This was about to get real. So, what would you do in a moment like that? Drop a comment below. Have you ever had someone jump to conclusions about you like that? Let's keep this story rolling.
The police cruiser pulled up the gravel driveway, its lights painting the cabin in alternating flashes of red and blue, like some kind of surreal light show.
The whole scene felt wrong, like my quiet retreat had been invaded by a reality TV crew. I stood on the porch, my hands stuffed in my pockets, trying to look calm, even though my heart was hammering. Karen was off to the side, near her own cabin's porch across the way, her arms crossed, and her smirk so smug, I swear it could have lit up the night. She was in her element, convinced she'd caught a trespasser and was about to see justice served. The officer stepped out of the cruiser, his boots crunching on the gravel with slow, deliberate steps. He was tall, probably in his late 30s, with a weathered face and a posture that screamed discipline. Shoulders back, head high, like he'd seen his share of chaos and knew how to handle it. I braced myself for the usual cop routine. What's your name? What are you doing here? Let's see some ID. But instead, he just looked at me. And not in a suspicious way, but in a way that felt heavy, like he was seeing something familiar. His eyes lingered, and for a split second, I thought I saw a flicker of recognition. Karen, of course, wasn't about to let the moment breathe. She stormed forward, her voice sharp and demanding. "Officer, this man is trespassing," she said, pointing at me like I was public enemy number one. "I've lived here for years, and I've never seen him before. He's not supposed to be here." Her confidence was unshakable, like she'd already written the script for my arrest in her head. But the officer didn't react the way she expected. He didn't pull out a notepad or start grilling me. He just stood there, his gaze still locked on me, his expression calm but intense. It was like he was sizing up the situation, not just as a cop, but as someone who knew more than he was letting on. The air felt thick, like the whole forest was holding its breath. Even the cicadas seemed to quiet down, and the only sound was the faint hum of the cruiser's engine and the crackle of its radio. I glanced at Karen, and I could see her starting to fidget. Her arms were still crossed, but her smirk was faltering, like she could sense something wasn't going her way. She expected the officer to jump at her command, but his silence was throwing her off. And honestly, it was throwing me off too. Why was he looking at me like that? Had we met before? My mind started racing, trying to place him. Maybe a neighbor from years ago or someone I'd run into in town. But something told me this was deeper than that. The woods around us felt like they were watching, the tall pines casting long shadows in the flashing lights. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just about Karen's accusations. Something bigger was about to unfold, something she hadn't planned for. What do you think was going through my head right then? Have you ever been in a situation where you felt like the truth was about to come out in a big way? Let me know in the comments.
The officer stood just a few feet from me now, his eyes still locked on mine, and I swear I could feel the weight of his gaze, like he was seeing past the flannel shirt and the dusty boots, straight into a part of my life I hadn't thought about in years. Karen, meanwhile, was practically vibrating with impatience. "Officer, are you listening?" she snapped, her voice shrill enough to scare off any wildlife still lingering nearby. "This man is trespassing. I demand you do something about it." But the officer didn't even glance her way. He adjusted his hat, a slow, deliberate move, and I caught it again, that flicker of recognition in his eyes, stronger now, like a puzzle piece snapping into place. My heart started pounding, not out of fear, but out of curiosity. Who was this guy? Why did he keep looking at me like that? Let me give you a little context. Before I was just a guy who liked fishing and fixing up old cabins, I had another life, one I don't talk about much. I served in the military for years, climbing the ranks, leading teams through situations most people only see in movies. It wasn't something I advertised, especially not at the cabin, where I came to leave all that behind. But the way this officer was standing, the way his shoulders squared, the precision in his movements, it reminded me of the soldiers I'd served with. Was that it? Had we crossed paths in some dusty base halfway across the world? Karen kept going, her voice getting louder, more desperate. "I know everyone in this area," she shouted. "He's not one of us. He's probably squatting or stealing or—" But her words were starting to sound like background noise, like a radio station losing its signal. The officer's silence was louder, more powerful. He wasn't buying her story, and she could feel it. Her foot tapped against the gravel, her arms flailing as she tried to regain control. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Officer," I said, keeping my voice steady, "this is my family's cabin. I can show you the deed, photos, anything you need." But he held up a hand, not in a dismissive way, but like he was telling me to hold off. "No need, sir," he said, his voice low but firm. And there it was again, that look like he knew me. Karen's smirk was gone now, replaced by a flicker of doubt. She wasn't used to being ignored, and it was eating at her. "This is ridiculous," she huffed, throwing her hands up. But the officer's calm, disciplined presence made her look small, like a kid throwing a tantrum in front of a teacher who's seen it all. And in that charged silence, I felt it. A memory stirring, a piece of my past about to come crashing into the present. Have you ever had a moment where someone recognized you from a part of your life you thought was long gone? Hit the comments and share. It's wild how the past can sneak up on you. Karen's voice hit a fever pitch, slicing through the night like a siren of her own making. "Officer, I called you here for a reason," she barked, stomping closer, her heels grinding into the gravel like she was trying to dig her way back to control. "This man is trespassing, and you need to arrest him now." She was so sure of herself, so certain that her word was law. She'd probably spent years bullying neighbors into submission, calling the cops over every little thing, expecting them to jump at her command. But this officer? He wasn't playing her game. He didn't even look at her. His eyes stayed on me, steady and calm, like he was waiting for something. His posture was textbook military, shoulders back, chin up, hands clasped behind his back. It was the kind of stance that screamed discipline, the kind I'd seen in briefing rooms and on battlefields. My mind was racing now, trying to place him. Had he been one of my soldiers? A colleague? Someone I'd met in passing during a deployment? Karen wasn't used to being ignored, and it was driving her up the wall. "I've lived here for years," she shouted, her voice cracking with frustration. "I know who belongs and who doesn't. This guy is trouble, I'm telling you." She pointed at me, her finger shaking, but her accusations were starting to sound desperate, like she could feel the ground slipping out from under her. I decided to try again. "Ma'am," I said, keeping my tone even, "this cabin's been in my family for decades. I've got every right to be here." But before I could finish, the officer raised a hand again, silencing me, not out of disrespect, but like he already knew the truth. "I understand, sir," he said, his voice carrying a weight that made Karen freeze. Her eyes darted between us, her smirk completely gone now. She tried to laugh, a nervous, brittle sound that echoed in the silence. "This is absurd," she said, her voice rising to a desperate pitch. "You're just going to let him stay? You're not even checking?" But the officer's silence was like a wall, unyielding and impenetrable. And then I saw it. His posture shifted, just slightly, his shoulders squaring even more, like he was preparing for something. I could feel it too. This wasn't just about a trespassing call anymore. Something from my past, something I'd buried deep, was about to come to light. And Karen? She had no idea what was coming. What's the worst neighbor drama you've ever seen? Drop it in the comments. I bet some of you have stories that rival this one.
The tension was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Karen was still ranting, her voice a mix of fury and desperation, but it was like shouting into a void. The officer stood there, calm as ever, his eyes still locked on me. And then, in one swift, deliberate motion, he raised his hand to his brow and gave me a crisp, formal salute. "Yes, Major General," he said, his voice ringing with authority and reverence, loud enough to echo off the trees and silence every other sound in the forest. Karen's jaw hit the floor. Her scoff caught in her throat, and for a moment I thought she might actually faint.
Her eyes went wide, darting between me and the officer, like she was trying to rewrite the scene in her head. But there was no rewriting this. The officer's words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Major General. Let me back up for a second, because I know some of you are probably as shocked as Karen was. I don't talk about it much, but years ago, I was a high-ranking officer in the military. Major General, a 2-star general, not exactly a small deal. I'd led missions, commanded thousands of soldiers, and seen things most people can't imagine. But after I retired, I left that life behind. The cabin was my escape from all that, a place where I could just be a regular guy, not a title or a rank. But this officer, he knew me. Not the flannel-wearing, fish-catching version of me, but the man in uniform who'd stood tall in moments of crisis. His salute wasn't just a gesture, it was a recognition of a bond forged in service, a respect that ran deeper than Karen's petty accusations could ever touch. Karen tried to speak, her mouth opening and closing like she was gasping for air. This is impossible, she stammered. He's just some squatter. You're making this up. But the officer didn't even acknowledge her. His salute lingered, his eyes never leaving mine, and I could see it now, the memory clicking into place. I didn't know his name, but I knew that look. We'd served together, maybe in Iraq or Afghanistan, maybe during a late-night briefing or a tense operation. The details were fuzzy, but the respect was crystal clear. Karen's world was falling apart, and she knew it. Her accusations, her whole narrative about me being a criminal had been just obliterated by 2 words and a salute. She stood there, frozen, her smugness replaced by a look of pure, unfiltered shock. Have you ever seen someone's entire worldview crumble in real time? Share your stories in the comments. This moment was one for the books. Karen's face was a mess of emotions, rage, disbelief, and something that looked a lot like fear. "This is a mistake," she stammered, her voice shaking as she tried to claw back some control. "Officer, you're wrong. He can't be. He's not." But her words were falling apart, crumbling like dry leaves under the weight of the officer's salute. "Major General," the officer said again, softer this time, but with the same reverence that cut through the night. "It's an honor to see you again, sir." His words weren't just for me. They were a statement, a line drawn in the sand that Karen couldn't cross. I could see her trying to process it, her eyes darting wildly, her hands clenching into fists. She'd built her whole identity on being the one in charge, the one who could summon the cops and get her way. But now, she was nothing. I stood there, my heart still racing as memories of my military days flooded back. Long nights in the desert, the weight of decisions that affected thousands of lives, the camaraderie of soldiers who became family. I didn't know this officer's name, but I knew his kind, the ones who never forget the chain of command, the ones who carry respect like a badge. And right now, that respect was dismantling Karen's entire narrative. She tried to laugh it off, a shaky, hollow chuckle that sounded more like a sob. "This is a trick," she said, her voice rising to a desperate pitch. "You're all in on this, aren't you? This is some kind of setup." But the officer's calm, disciplined presence made her accusation sound ridiculous, like a child yelling at a brick wall. Her confidence was gone, replaced by a frantic energy that was almost painful to watch. I almost felt bad for her, almost. But then I remembered the way she'd stormed onto my property, pointing and shouting, ready to ruin my weekend over nothing. She'd called the cops without a second thought, convinced she was the hero of her own story. Now, standing in the glow of the cruiser's lights, she was learning the hard way that the world doesn't bend to her will. What's the most satisfying moment you've seen someone get called out for their nonsense? Drop it in the comments. I'm loving these stories. Karen's desperation erupted like a volcano, her voice breaking into shrieks that echoed through the forest. "This is outrageous!" she screamed, stopping her foot so hard I thought she might break a heel. "I called you here to do your job, not to play games."
She flailed her arms, pointing at me, at the officer, at the cabin, like she could somehow bully reality into aligning with her version of events. But the officer didn't budge. His silence was like a mirror, reflecting her meltdown for what it was, the tantrum of someone who'd lost control. Her movements were wild now, almost erratic. Her heels wobbled on the gravel, and her face was flush red under the flashing lights. She was searching for something, anything to hold on to, some way to make her story stick. "I know my rights," she shouted, her voice cracking into a high-pitched wail. "You can't just ignore me. I'm a taxpayer. I deserve respect." But the officer's calm presence made her look small, insignificant, like a child throwing a fit in front of someone who'd seen real battles. I stood there, watching her unravel, and I couldn't help but think about how people like Karen operate. They thrive on intimidation, on the belief that their voice is louder than anyone else's. I've seen it before, not just in neighbors like her, but in all kinds of situations. People who think they can control others by making a scene, by wielding their version of authority. But when the truth comes out, when they're faced with something bigger than their ego, they fall apart. Her eyes darted around, searching for some ally in the darkness, but the forest wasn't on her side. The trees, the lake, the cabin, they were all silent witnesses to her collapse. Her voice cracked again, turning into a pleading cry. "You're making a mistake," she said, almost begging now. But the officer's silence was relentless, and it was breaking her more than any words could. Have you ever watched someone dig their own hole deeper and deeper? Share your stories in the comments. This one was a masterclass in self-destruction.
Karen's voice was barely holding together now, her accusations tumbling into a mess of half-formed sentences. You can't do this," she sputtered, pointing a trembling finger at me. "He's lying. You're all lying." Her words were desperate, clawing at the air, but they landed like pebbles in a pond, ripples that faded into nothing. The officer stood like a statue, his composure unshaken, letting her words crash and burn in the night. The flashing lights painted her face in harsh reds and blues, and with every flicker, you could see her facade crumbling. Her arrogance, her certainty, her belief that she could control the narrative, it was all falling apart. She stomped closer, her heels wobbling dangerously on the uneven gravel, but her threats felt empty now, like a storm that had blown itself out. "I'll call your supervisor," she shouted, her voice hoarse. "I'll report this." But the officer didn't even blink. I could see the panic in her eyes, the realization that she'd miscalculated everything. She'd called the cops expecting them to back her up, to validate her suspicions. But instead, she'd walked into a moment she couldn't control. The officer's respect for me, his recognition of my past, was a wall she couldn't climb. And it wasn't just about me being a major general. It was about the truth. Karen had built her whole case on lies and assumptions, and now those lies were collapsing under the weight of reality. I thought about all the times I'd seen people like her, in the military and out. People who think they can bully their way to victory, who think volume and persistence can overwrite the truth. But the truth doesn't bend. It's patient, unyielding, and when it finally speaks, it shuts down everything else. Karen's voice faltered into breathless gasps, and the silence that followed was deafening. It was the sound of her reign of intimidation coming to an end. What's the most epic shutdown you've ever witnessed? Drop it in the comments. I'm loving how this story's resonating with you all.
Karen's collapse was complete. Her voice, once a weapon that could silence a room, dwindled to a hoarse whimper as she leaned against the hood of her car. Her hands were shaking, her shoulders slumped, like even standing upright was too much effort. The officer didn't move, didn't offer her a shred of sympathy. His silence was punishment enough, a cold, unyielding reminder that the authority she'd tried to wield was never hers to begin with. She looked small, deflated, like all the fire had been snuffed out of her. The bravado she'd carried into this moment was gone, stripped away by the weight of the truth. I didn't feel triumph watching her crumble, just a quiet calm. The cabin stood behind me, its weathered walls unmoved by her chaos, a silent witness to her downfall. I thought about how this all started. Just a guy trying to enjoy a weekend at his family's cabin, sorting through old memories, maybe fishing a little. And Karen? She'd turned it into a battlefield, all because she couldn't stand the idea of someone she didn't control being in her territory. But the cabin wasn't hers. The truth wasn't hers. And now, standing in the glow of the cruiser's lights, she was nothing more than a cautionary tale. I glanced at the officer, who gave me a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of the bond we shared. I still didn't know his name, but I didn't need to. Some connections don't need words. They're built on respect, on shared experiences that run deeper than a single moment. Karen, on the other hand, had no one. Her neighbors, her so-called allies, weren't here to back her up. She'd burned too many bridges with her antics, and now she was alone, defeated by her own arrogance. What's a moment where you saw someone's arrogance come back to bite them? Share it in the comments. This story's got me thinking about all the Karens out there.
As the cruiser's lights finally dimmed and the night reclaimed its quiet, the weight of what had happened settled over me like a heavy fog. Karen had come with fire and fury, armed with nothing but her own entitlement, believing she could bend the world to her will. She'd called the cops, pointed fingers, and thrown accusations, all because she couldn't stand the idea of someone existing outside her control. But in the end, all she left behind was silence. A silence louder than her screams, heavier than her rage. The cabin stood tall, its creaky porch and weathered walls untouched by her chaos. To me, it was more than just a building now. It was a symbol of resilience, a reminder that no amount of intimidation can outlast integrity. I walked out onto the porch, looking at the dark forest and the stars reflecting on the lake. The air was cool, the kind of crisp that makes you feel alive. And I realized this wasn't just about me or Karen, it was about something bigger. Think about it. How many Karens are out there trying to control everything and everyone around them? They thrive on fear, on suspicion, on the belief that their voice is the only one that matters. But when the truth comes out, when it stands tall and unyielding, their power crumbles. This night was proof of that. The officer's salute, his recognition of my past, wasn't just about my rank. It was about the truth cutting through the noise. I've seen it before, in the military and in life. People who think they can bully their way to victory, who think they can rewrite reality with enough shouting. But the truth is patient. It waits. And when it speaks, it shuts down everything else. Karen learned that the hard way, and I hope she walked away with a lesson. Though, knowing her type, she'll probably just move on to the next target. So, I'm asking you guys, how many Karens have you seen in your life? How many times have you watched someone try to twist the truth only to get shut down by reality? And more importantly, how many more need to fall before people learn that integrity, not intimidation, is what lasts? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm reading every single one, and I love hearing your stories.
All right, you made it through the whole saga. How wild was that? If you loved this story, smash that like button to let me know you want more crazy tales like this one. Have you ever dealt with a Karen who got put in their place? Drop your stories in the comments. I'm going to read them all, and I might even feature some in my next video. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an update. And if you know someone who needs to hear this lesson about truth and integrity, share this video with them. Let's spread the word. Oh, and if you want to support the channel even more, check out the merch link in the description. I've got some cool designs inspired by moments like this. Thanks for watching, you amazing people, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay real, stay true, and let's keep the good vibes going.